If you're in charge of back office operations at your organization, then you've probably heard of the Lean and Six Sigma methodologies. A common misunderstanding about these methodologies is in their application, especially when they are combined. You see, Lean Six Sigma is about continuous improvement. This means you must have a fundamental understanding of your current state processes in order to correctly apply Lean Six Sigma. Hi, I'm Alicia Butler-Pierre, and in this live consultation, I'm going to share another framework, one that I created, with an up-and-coming HR consultant. You can think of this other framework as a precursor to process improvement. After all, you have to identify and document your current processes before you can start improving them, right? This is Season 10, Episode 127. Let's start the show. This episode is brought to you by 𝗟𝗲𝘁𝗀𝗀. It's an app that allows you to be the director of your own show, and I'll explain more about that in just a few minutes. But first, joining me today for our live workflow workshop, also here in Atlanta, Georgia, is Mr. Cornelius Dowdell, and we call him Neil. And so I'm so glad that you could join me today, Neil. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am doing well, Neil. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to have a lot of fun. We have fun anytime we ever talk, so I'm really excited about our conversation today. And you know, Neil, before we get started, I was trying to think of how we actually met, because it seems like we've known each other for so long. I know we're both from Louisiana. We both went to Louisiana State University, undergrad. And then I remembered that Wilma Simon, shout out to Wilma, she's the person who introduced us to each other. And at the time, you were working at Emory University's Continuous Education Division. So if you wouldn't mind, if we could first start with you telling us about what led you to working at Emory and ultimately what's led you to you starting and founding your own consulting company, the 𝗕𝗂𝘂𝑀 Strategy. Tell us more about that journey.
Yes, will do. So how we met, I believe, Wilma introduced us, and I was at Emory University serving as the program manager for the corporate learning aspects. So really reaching out to organizations, bringing learning and training development programs to their employees, managerial staff. And we had a Lean Six Sigma program, ranges from white belt, green belt, yellow belt, black belt, and I've reached out to you because you were referred, highly recommended as far as being able to help others learn about Lean Six Sigma process improvement and operational efficiency. So that's how we met, and then I found out that you was a fellow Tiger. Then I found out that we had a lot more in common, and it was just great. So I was like, this is like a marriage. It was meant to be, right? So from that piece, I believe I left Emory probably about 8-9 months ago, really looking to see where my career was going to take me, partnering with other organizations. And so I founded the 𝗕𝗂𝘂𝘀𝗀𝗀 Strategy. The name came from a nickname. People don't like to say Cornelius, so they like to shorten it every now and then. So instead of shortening it to corn, one of my friends decided 𝗕𝗂𝘂𝘂𝘀, right? See? So I took the 𝗕𝗂𝘂𝘂𝘀 and I ran with it because it's so much better than corn.
I agree.
So the 𝗕𝗂𝘂𝘀 Strategy really came off from a nickname from one of my friends, and then I just really put it on everything else. I even make a spice blend. I call it's called Spice by 𝗕𝗂𝘂𝘂𝘀. So there's a variety of different things I use the name for, but the 𝗕𝗂𝘂𝘀 Strategy is a passion because I like helping and working with individuals, organizations, and teams, whether they are looking to become leaders or they're looking to build out their organization and streamline things.
And you've done really well considering starting a business in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. But I know the last time we talked prior to this conversation we're having right now, you were just kind of almost bursting at the seams with demand for your services. That's a great problem to have, by the way.
It is a great problem to have. So me and my team have been really testing out these operations that we put in place, working with small and medium-sized organizations, and some other contracts that are coming out. And bursting at the seams is is a great way to describe it. But it's been fun. It really has been fun. The power of networking, that is
Yes.
really truly of great value. So for anyone listening to this, networking is how I met you. It's actually how I've been introduced to a lot of my clients, and just really finding that niche and just working with it and being friendly.
And so speaking of working your niche, the good thing for you is that you went into this already knowing what your niche was going to be. And I'm sure you've been refining it and tweaking it along the way, because that's what usually happens in business, right? We start with one idea or concept, but ultimately it's your customers at the end of the day who help to refine, what your niche should actually be, because they tell you what they actually want and maybe even need. So speaking of that, I know when we last talked, I think a few weeks ago, you were asking me about how to actually identify processes to document. And I love having that conversation because I've created a framework for that. And what we decided to do was actually have this conversation here live on the podcast, and also for those who are watching the video here on YouTube. But it all started with us having a video exchange using the 𝗟𝗏𝘁 app. And so what we were able to do is Neil was able to create a quote unquote show on this app, which is free, by the way. And you were able to describe the specific topic that you wanted to talk about here on the podcast. And then I, in turn, was able to respond to you like, hey, Neil, great. Thank you for letting me know what you want to talk about. These are the 3 things that I want you to think about in preparation for our discussion here on the show. So let's go ahead and listen to that video exchange right now.
Good morning. I am Cornelius Dowdell with the 𝗕𝗂𝘀𝘀𝗀𝗀 Strategy, a boutique HR consulting firm focusing on HR consulting, talent development, and operational efficiency. So lately I've been working with a lot of small family-owned businesses that have internal HR support teams. However, they would like to streamline some of those operational pieces, develop SOPs, re-evaluate their employee manuals, and a few other processes to help them connect some of their internal pieces to their organizational growth plans and strategic plans. So I'm normally responsible for those HR pieces, aligning those with KPIs for the organization and with the employees. What I've noticed lately is that sometimes those systems exist, sometimes they do not, and sometimes they're outdated. So I'm reaching out to you to see about how we can discuss some of those internal processes with people, business systems, and aligning them with organizational goals. Thank you.
Hi, Neil. If there's one thing that I know, it's process. And what I always tell people is that before you can actually talk about improving a process, you have to first have those processes documented. And some people even struggle with that documentation piece because they don't know where on earth to start. So while you're on the podcast, we're going to cover 3 main things. We'll start off with figuring out all of the different tasks that have to be performed for a typical organization that you would work with, particularly as it relates to HR. From there, we'll then identify the processes from those tasks that need to be captured, and then we'll wrap up with the discussion about discovering the best methods for documenting each of those processes. So we'll talk about those 3 things plus so much more when we get together on the podcast. Okay, and Neil and I were just kind of chuckling as we were listening to that video exchange again. So Neil, many people talk about processes. And some people even express an interest in, as you mentioned earlier, Lean or Lean Six Sigma, but they still don't even know how to start with documenting, yet alone identifying the processes before you can even document them. And before you improve them, you have to have them documented. So let's start walking through that. Again, I'd like to share with you my framework, and I know you've read the book. So some of this is probably, yes, shameless plug. Thank you for holding that up in the camera. Thank you very much, Neil. That is much appreciated. So one of the first things, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly so that we can take a look at this together. So the goal is to understand and have a repeatable process for how we actually identify the processes. And again, this is almost a first step before you can even get down the path of documenting your processes, yet alone actually improving them. So what I have here, this is actually a logo that represents the framework that I've created, which is called Kasennu. And I get into the explanation of how, that name came to be. But you'll notice there are two arrows pointing to 2 out of the 7 elements that make up this logo. The first one is the largest one, which is blue. It shows these little stick figures. Those represent people. And the reason that's so important is because, as we know with business infrastructure, it's always about the people, the processes, and the tools. But I like to start off with identifying the task as well as the people before we even get to processes, technologies, and other tools that are needed to facilitate day-to-day operations. So let's first take a look at that people component. So let me just do a page down here. So the very first thing that we want to do is identify all of the different tasks that have to be performed for one of your clients. So we're just going to speak very hypothetically, very high level, and very generically here, because we know you work with many different types of companies. But the example that I have here on the screen that we're looking at, these are what I call typical topics that relate to HR, human resources. So we have, for example, different types of forms, independent contractor forms, employee forms, an employee manual, health insurance, different benefits that you may be offering to your company. The reason I like to start with these topics is because it helps you facilitate your brainstorming exercise or your brainstorming sessions with your clients. And please stop me along the way if you need me to explain something or answer, if you have a question that comes up, I'm more than happy to answer
no,
it.
I'm very familiar with all of these tasks.
Being that you are the HR guru, I know you are. So
Just wrap all that up under employee onboarding. Yes.
And let me share this really quickly. So this is an internal tool that I use. I don't know if you all, can you see this? I know you can't probably see it
Yeah,
really
I can see
clearly.
it.
Okay. So what I have here, this is an 11 by 17 document that I use, and I literally give a copy of this to each person that's participating in a brainstorming session.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I need that.
And we can definitely get you a copy of this. We will talk about that offline. And also for anyone who's watching or listening, please reach out to me if you'd like a copy of this. So we have these different tasks. There's hundreds of tasks listed on this document here, and we have them categorized into 6 main sections: accounting and finance, marketing, operations, business development and research. There's the HR piece, which obviously you're very familiar with. There's technology, and then there's legal and all compliance and regulatory type things that we as business owners have to deal with. So let me go.
Sound like all of the things that I try to avoid that I encounter every day.
We have to stay in compliance, right? Else we won't have a business. But I find that it's such a useful guide, because we know that we do a lot of things, but it's not until we see a document like this that it really brings context to just how much work we're doing. And when you are facilitating, again, these brainstorming exercises with your clients to help them figure out all of the different things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, just prepare to be wowed. They're going to be blown away. I'm going to share my screen again here so we can get back to that presentation. But yes, they're going to be absolutely amazed by everything that they're doing. And what I recommend, Neil, is, well, because of the COVID environment that we're in right now, meeting in person with your clients may not always be feasible. If you were meeting in person, I would recommend getting those really large Post-it notes.
So, Alicia.
Yes.
I
Yes,
remember
Neil.
your instructor preview session
Mm-hmm.
for
At
Emory,
Emory, yes.
and you pulled out these large cards to help us document some processes ourselves. And
Yes.
that's really, you are literally the inspiration that actually helped me get into consulting because I was like, but I do this all the time. So I actually have over here somewhere these large cards
Yes.
that come in
Wait,
different colors. I made sure I get them. I bring them everywhere I
wait,
go.
put them back up so that
Everywhere I
okay.
go.
Yes,
These
yes,
large
yes.
cards. They are literally the biggest post-it notes I've ever seen, besides the ones hanging up around my place.
Right.
And they have been so beneficial when really helping identify tasks and rolling them up into overall departments, which you're about to get into, of course.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
exactly. So I can actually see in the background, you have one of those easel, like an easel
Hmm.
pad. That's
Great.
exactly what I'm talking about. So for those who are watching this, you can see in Neil's background hanging on the door. That's what I'm talking about. So if you want to conduct this brainstorming session just by yourself, you're more than welcome to. But in Neil's case, he's a consultant, and so if he does have this in-person consultation session with his client, then he can leverage something like that and just write as they begin using that document with all of the topics, they can actually start to think of all of the tasks that are associated with those different topics. And Neil would
Correct.
just write that down on the easel.
Hmm.
Okay, so we got that part out of the way. The other thing is once you start writing, you have all of those tasks that show up on your easel board. And for those who aren't able to meet in person, you can definitely do this remotely as well. You can use something like PowerPoint. And let me share my screen again here just so I can give a visual of what that would look like.
Or breakout rooms.
Yes, you could use breakout rooms, absolutely. So this right here is just something that this is PowerPoint. And so I just created these what to simulate what an index card might look like or some type of a small note card. And you can literally start typing the name of every task onto these different cards. And that way, everyone who's participating in the brainstorming exercise have the benefit of seeing this on the screen together. And whoever is the facilitator, in this case would be you, Neil, or the moderator, you would be able to literally just start typing as different people start brainstorming the different things that they work on throughout the company. Okay. The next thing that you want to do is actually, so we went from having very generic names, A3, B5, C3 for tasks. That's for illustrative purposes only. But here on this next slide, you actually see these are some example accounting activities. So for example, we have mark the invoice as paid in the software, email the invoice to the client, generate invoice in the software. So these are just some examples of tasks that may be generated in the process of brainstorming things that the company may be doing as it relates to accounting.
And I would just like to add that I
Yes.
was reading the book last night, and this
Okay.
whole process was documented, and I am doing the exact same documentation for a process with one of my
Yay.
clients right now.
That is awesome,
And
Neil.
it was like beautiful. I was like, yes, thank you. I said, you did all the work for me. Here you go. So having that meeting and that discussion was literally, I was like, y'all need this book here. So I'm ordering a book
Yes.
for my clients so that they can have it because they have a lot more processes to go.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's so good to hear. So imagine again, you have, if you're in person, you have all of these different tasks that have been identified. And if you're working remotely, you're going to have all of these different tasks. You're going to probably have multiple slides if you're using something like PowerPoint. And then you want to start to figure out how do you start grouping similar tasks together into departments. And I'm going to stop sharing really quickly here. And I'm going to just give again, a very generic demonstration. So let's say you have task A2, A3, and A1. So you may say, you know what? these are all tasks that have to do with A. We have A1, A2, and A3, right?
Right.
So as you're facilitating this with your clients may then say, well, you know what, Neil, if I had to assign a department name to these 3 tasks that all start with the letter A, we would call it Department A. Or in your case, it may be, yes, Neil, this grouping of tasks represents our HR department. This grouping of tasks represents our legal department. This third grouping of tasks represents our sales and marketing department.
So can I throw you a curveball?
Yes, you can.
What if they don't have departments?
That's the whole idea, is to help them figure out those departments. And I'm glad you said that, because we're talking about literally putting in the foundation that's going to help them organize and structure literally every single operational component of their business. That's such a good question, because many small businesses especially, they cannot articulate what the inside of their company actually looks like. And when you ask most of them, well, how is your company?
So
Yeah, how is your company structured? A lot of times when people hear that, when business owners or entrepreneurs hear that, they think about legal structure. So they may tell you, oh, well, my company is an S corporation, or my company is an LLC, or my company is a sole proprietorship. But that's not what we're talking about in this case.
Doesn't tell you anything.
Right. So we're talking about how is it actually structured into departments. And those who are listening and watching right now, you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, Alicia and Neil, I thought you all were trying to get to the processes. But just hang with us, because before you get to the process, you first need to, again, identify all of these different tasks and activities that are performed in the business, figure out how to group them into departments. And then once you figure all of that out, then you're in a position to actually start to identify the processes. So let me share my screen again. Yes, Neil.
No, I'm saying yes, this is perfect.
Good. Okay, so we talked about assigning role. Actually, we did not. So I'm sorry. Let me get to that piece first. Let me do another little demonstration here. So what I use, Neil, and this is a product that I have, these are laminated stick figures. So I have here the CEO, and I have office manager. And the reason they're laminated is because I can use dry erase markers like this. And any title or any role that I write in black, that indicates to everyone who's participating in the exercise that that's a position that's already filled. Anything that you see that's written in red, like this office manager here, that indicates a vacant role. Here's why this is so important. As entrepreneurs, we already know we're wearing many different hats. And especially, yes, especially with the small business, you and I are both working with smaller companies, right?
Yes.
And we tend to wear many different hats. We know we need to delegate, but oftentimes we can't figure out exactly when or where to begin that delegation. So the beauty of having, again, you're going to have your department. We have Department A here. Sorry about the lighting. Let's say you have task A2 within Department A. So Neil, if you're working with your client, you may start to analyze all of the different tasks within you're going to work on one department at a time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you may say, okay, CEO of ABC company, in a perfect world, if you had access to all of the resources that you needed, who ideally should perform task A2? Not who's doing it currently, because the person who's doing it currently may not be the best qualified to do that position. And that happens with us a lot.
It happens a lot. Yes.
You can't
Right.
be I remember one time years ago, I was talking to someone who had a business, and he was so excited about a new hire. He had just hired someone fresh out of college. And this person graduated with a degree in accounting. And he said, oh my goodness, I'm so excited because he'll be able to do the books. He may even be able to make some of the deliveries. He'll be able to do this. He'll be able to, I said, whoa.
He can do marketing too, huh? Mm.
Yes, and so that happens with us, right? We get excited because we have employees, and then we just keep throwing things at them without an appreciation for the fact that they're not expecting to wear these multiple hats the way that you, as the owner of the business, the visionary of the business, you have no problem rolling up your sleeve and sweeping the floors if they need to be swept, or phoning a client that may be delinquent on a payment. We have no problem doing that as business owners, but we have to understand that when we hire people to work for us, they have been hired to perform a very specific function and role within our companies, and we have to maintain the integrity of that.
Right. You have to adhere to it as well because it's not fair to the employee.
Exactly.
And so
And this
I've been
is
in roles like where I've been hired to do one thing, but then I've been given two other job roles.
Mhm.
And when I say whole job roles, completely different. Whereas,
Yes.
the way because I knew a lot about marketing isn't because I majored in marketing and I went to school for it. It's because I was given a marketing role. And
Mm.
I'm just like, yeah, but yeah, I know how to build out a campaign for you. Put some analytics behind it and everything. But it is not my strong point. But but I can flex into the area if you want me to.
Right. And so what happens when things don't turn out the way that we would like for them to turn out, then we get angry at that employee, which, as you just said, isn't fair, because we hired this person to be the accountant, our internal controller, if you will, and not necessarily also the marketing person, the graphic designer, the person to build ad campaigns.
And you'll be wonderful how all that transitions into their performance review, and then now
Yes.
you have HR issues, employee relations, and we're going
Yes.
through and like, well, I mean, but we hired them to do accounting. Why are we discussing marketing and technology?
Right. And that's it, because when you start talking about scaling, you have to put this structure in place. And as
Yes.
much as people want to say, well, we don't want to be corporate, this is a time where you want to mimic a larger corporation. You have to have that structure. Otherwise, there will just be pure chaos, and that leads to high employee turnover, which is costly.
And then also, you put all your eggs in one basket. So when that turnover
Mhm.
does happen, or for instance, I'm working with a client now where the office manager does everything. But if the office manager leaves, where does that leave the business?
Wow. Yeah. Creating dependency. So again, as you start to ask them task by task who ideally should be performing the task, even if that person doesn't currently exist within the company, and that's when you may have, you may put a little stick figure like this right above that task and write the name of that role, not the name of the person, the name of the role or the position in red. That's going to visually indicate to everyone who's looking at it, you know what, this is a role that we recognize we need to have filled that isn't currently filled, but that's what we're working toward. So I just wanted to point that out.
Now I need stick figures.
And we can arrange that too for you, Neil. We can definitely arrange that. So let me share my screen again here. So we've identified the task at this point. We've grouped those similar tasks into different departments. We've now gone into each department and we have identified the ideal role that should perform each of these tasks. Now we get to the part where we can actually identify the processes. So what we have on the screen here before us, we have these 5 different tasks that were all identified as being tasks that are related to the accounting department. Well, as you look at all of the tasks, Neil, within a particular department, you then want to group those tasks even more within each department. And so in this case, we have these 5 different tasks, and they're similar in nature. And I'll read those tasks off for those who don't have the benefit of seeing this video. Generate invoice in the software, add the due date and a thank you message to the invoice, email the invoice to the client, collect credit card payment from client, mark the invoice as paid in the software. Those 5 tasks, as you're working with your client, you may say, you know what? These tasks all seem similar in nature. If they were grouped together to form a process, what would you call that process? What would the name of that process be? And in this case, we're saying accounts receivable. Well, some of your clients may say, well, Neil, we would call this our billing process. Other clients might say, we would call this our invoicing process. Whatever it's called, just make sure that everyone is on the same page, and you're just going to keep grouping all of those tasks within each department until you've assigned every single task to a process. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So let's move on. This is really small, and I apologize for it. But what we have here is a table. So what's going to happen, Neil, is once you have identified all of the processes that need to be documented for every single department, imagine creating this table. You could create it in a Word document. You could create it in PowerPoint. I prefer Excel just because Excel is built for having tables and spreadsheets. So this is actually something I copied and pasted over from Excel, and let me see if I can expand this a little bit more just so we can see it a little easier. Okay, this is a little bit better. So let me just try to describe this for those, again, who don't have the benefit of being able to see it visually right now. We have this table. I call it a matrix, but we can also call it a table or a process inventory. And what you have on the far left column is department. So you're going to have the name of every single department. In this example, we have human resources, legal compliance, sales and marketing, and operations. The next column over that we have is a priority column. I'm going to get to that explanation, but first let me talk about the processes column. So the third column in this table is processes. That's where you're going to have a listing of every single process for each department. This is going to be a primary inventory of all of the processes that have to be documented for your particular client. So here in this example for human resources, we have the following processes: onboarding and training, agent compliance support, sales associate setup, and performance evaluation. Going back to that priority column, once you've listed out every single process for each department, you then want to ask your client, because obviously everything can't be documented all at once. You know, it can be a tedious endeavor.
Who asks for everything all at once?
No, not just, some people want it all at once, and or if not yesterday, right? That's always the answer too. Yeah, I wanted it done yesterday. But it helps to have a conversation around prioritization. So what I've always found helpful, Neil, is as you're working with your client, ask them, what are the top 5 priority processes? If you had to have some processes that you need to have documented so that you can make sure everyone is on the same page, what 5 processes are those? And it may shock you, because when your clients first engage you, they may say, Neil, we really have an issue with our X process. It's not well defined. People are doing things differently. We need to get some standardization in place. But after going through this exercise that we've been talking through, it could be that by the time they get to this point where they're analyzing this inventory and they see all of the processes there, hopefully on one page in front of them, it may shed light onto something that they hadn't seen before. So all we're talking about doing is literally getting all of this information, this resident knowledge that's in everyone's heads, and we're getting it onto paper. And once we have it on paper, everyone now has the benefit of looking at the same information at the same time and coming up with what truly is the top priority.
This is beautiful.
Why, thank you, Neil. The next column here is KPIs. So our key performance indicators, or what some people would refer to as metrics. So it's not enough to to identify the process, how are you going to measure the performance of that process? How will you know at the end of the day whether or not that process was performed properly? Okay, that's the importance of having that column. The next column is the documentation method, and this is probably something that you saw in chapter 8 of my book. There's multiple ways of capturing a process. We can have a typical standard operating procedure format where it's literally step by step by step. Step 1, you do this. Step 2, you do that. Step 3, so forth and so on. There's also the process map or flow chart method for documenting a process. Yes.
I was looking at that one
Yes.
last night, and I was like, oh, that would be very interesting to have that visual aid or piece
Yes.
too.
And I'll tell you, process maps, I'm so glad you said that, Neil, as a visual aid. There's something very magical, my friend, about actually flow charting. See, I get so passionate when I talk about this, Neil.
I'm resonating because I'm over here. I'm with you. I don't write on my walls for nothing. I got smart written in the background.
So, but seriously, when you write something in a procedural format, again, it's just, literally the steps of a process, you lose the benefit of being able to see where the opportunities to do something better may exist. When you have that flow chart, you have that visual, you can, because everything is in boxes and you're looking at how tasks are connected for this process, you start to see it in a way that you may not see it if you're just looking at it in a procedure format or any other format for that reason. That's why when we start talking about some of the more advanced methodologies like Lean Six Sigma, where it's all about process improvement, it's always helpful to start with a flowchart or process map version of the process so that you can figure out what is the cycle time? How long does it take us to perform every single one of these steps in this process map? How can we streamline this? Is there a way to automate it? Is there a software? There may be things that we're doing manually. Is there a software that can do some of this stuff for us? Having it in that flowchart format allows you to have that kind of a conversation. Another format that many people find very helpful also are checklists. And some people frown on that, but checklists can be, don't sleep on checklists. They can be very, very helpful. I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
I said I make them as templates.
Yes,
Hey,
yes.
so if you have them as a template for them to check off, I'm working with a business system right now, and I'm building out templates and making checklists because there are so many pieces that are involved in the process that they're not going to read an SOP.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's just going to be too much information, but a checklist sums it up, and then they're able to follow and check it off and move forward. So hopefully I can jump ahead.
And no, that's perfect. And at the end of the day, what's most important is making sure that regardless of who performs that process, that the end result is consistent, that there isn't a drop in quality, and that, again, that it's performed or delivered consistently. That's the whole point of going through this documentation effort. You want, whether Neil does it, whether Alicia does it, whether John Doe, Jane Smith, whoever, that end result should roughly always be the same. It's kind of like what, have you read the E-Myth by any chance?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that as a tool when we get to the tools section of our discussion. But one of the things that the author of that book, Michael Gerber, talks about is McDonald's. He uses the McDonald's franchise as an example. And he says, think about it, whether you go to a McDonald's in Atlanta, Georgia, or in Hong Kong, your experience is pretty much going to be the same. Obviously, there will be some cultural nuances here and there, but for the most part, you know what to expect when you go inside of a McDonald's or when you go inside of a Starbucks. No matter where you are in the world, you pretty much know what to expect.
That's French fries are the same. They are.
All French fries are created equal, Neil?
All French fries are
Okay.
created at McDonald's.
At
At
McDonald's at
McDonald's.
least. Okay.
At McDonald's at least. I can't speak for everybody else, but at McDonald's at least.
Well, that's good to know. So again, that's, you know, we're having fun with this, but that's seriously, that's the idea behind all of this. You know, why go through the painstaking details of getting everything documented if you don't enforce the, people adhering to those documented processes to ensure that everything is happening again consistently. The next column in our table here is performer. And what that basically means, Neil, is who is the person or who are the people responsible for performing that process? Who's going to be held accountable? And then the very last column, it's cut off here on our screen, but the very last column is called the gatekeeper. And that is the person who is responsible for making sure that that process is always updated. Because as we know, things change. We may have a process that involves the use of let's say, QuickBooks, if we're talking about accounting. Well, then all of a sudden the company decides, well, we no longer want to use QuickBooks. We're going to use FreshBooks. So now if you've been assigned, Neil, as the gatekeeper of our accounts receivable process, and there's references to QuickBooks all throughout those processes, you would be the person responsible to make sure that they're updated and reflected to show the change to FreshBooks. And I just remembered there's one other documentation method that I failed to mention, which is so important, and that is video. Video is a really, yes, video is such
Video.
Yes.
Recording.
Absolutely,
steps.
absolutely. And you know, using tools as simple as Zoom. There's another tool that many people use called Loom with an L. But sometimes, and especially if we're talking about software, if you have a process, Neil, that you're helping some of your clients document, and it involves the use of some type of a desktop application or web-based application or just software in general, remember the good old days when you'd have these really thick operations manuals and it'd have all these screenshots and
I might got one around here someplace.
Oh my gosh, they'd be like 80 to 100 pages.
Yes.
And it was just, oh my goodness, it was painful, very painful for the people who were in charge of keeping up that documentation, because the minute any update to that software took place, they would have to potentially change every single screenshot throughout that entire document. Could you imagine?
I've been the person that actually had to do that.
How was it, Neil?
It's dreadful. You know, every time you hear about a system update, you just
Yeah, it becomes your world, right?
Yes.
So why not break up? Let's imagine that 80-page document, and if we could chunk that up into, let's say, 10 8-minute videos or 5-minute videos, that would be so much more impactful, number one, so much more efficient. And I think a lot of people this is a more creative way of quickly capturing what you need to get done in terms of process documentation. You can also use something as simple as your phone. Every phone, for every person who has a smartphone now, I would imagine every business owner at this point, hopefully you have access to a smartphone, but there's a video component on every smartphone now. If there's something that you need to quickly show someone how to do and you're kind of in a crunch and you don't have time to type everything out, just record yourself. If you're trying to show how to use a particular piece of equipment, sometimes it's just easier to set up your phone and actually talk through how you're using that particular piece of equipment, and you're done.
Simple.
Very, very simple.
Say, hey, it can be an audio version of it. Just give it a way to break it up. And this goes into my talent development and training development piece, that sometimes it's easier to engage people in another form to convey the message, what you're trying to get out, instead of them just reading a manual. Maybe you need to break it up into different pieces, some audio, some video.
Yes.
And it really activates the mind a little bit as well.
It does. And I'm glad you brought that up, Neil, because we have to appreciate that not everyone processes information the same way. Some people need pictures and diagrams, whereas others can say, "No, I'm perfectly comfortable reading that 80-page manual. I like it." Me, I know I'm very visual. So infographics, videos, process maps, that's how I learn and process information. But again, not everyone is going to learn the same way. So we have to keep that in mind also as we're working with our staff. And the last thing is, once you've, for some people, they want to start with one department. They want to focus on one department exclusively and think of all of the tasks and activities that take place within that one department and identify all of those processes and then go about the task of actually capturing and documenting all of those processes. So what I mean here when I say apply to other areas of the business, it really means two different things. One, if you did just decide to focus exclusively, let's say for you, because of your HR expertise, if your clients want to focus only on HR things first, that's great. But by the time you get through everything as it relates to HR, you may tell them, you know what, you should probably seriously think about applying this to all of the other functional areas or departments of the company.
So what's very interesting is most people would understand that HR is really human resources, and there are humans across all aspects of the organization. So we tend to really end up in the marketing, in the technology, in the other pieces, and understanding those processes because that's where the humans are. And so my clients probably like yours. You probably start off with the HR pieces, but then you start realizing that some of the other issues stem from the other departments, which means you have to go into those departments to identify those issues because they're having a long-term impact in the HR department, because that's where they end up.
Yep. And we're trying to prevent them coming to you, right?
Yes, through a good old process map. Just make sure that when it says no, it goes back the other way. Don't stay here.
That's an excellent point, and it ties so nicely to how we started this conversation off with. Well, why are we talking about task? I'm trying to get my processes identified. But we have to go back to the task because that really serves as the foundation for everything else that you're going to do. So the other way of applying this to other areas of the business, so we're back to this logo here for my framework for creating business infrastructure. And so we focused on, again, the people piece. We talked about the process element. There are 5 other elements. And so now that you know, Neil, all of the people, the task, and the departments, that literally serves as a foundation for how you create the organizational chart, how you define the processes, as we've already discussed, how you actually structure both the electronic as well as the physical records, and how you actually physically organize workspace. Once you know those departments, you know who needs to be sitting where, because you're going to know how information flows from one person in one department to someone else in another department. You know who ideally should be sitting in close proximity to each other. Again, we're in the, because of the pandemic, we don't really have that issue right now because most people are working remotely. But that's the idea of this. We always want to start with this big blue section here in the logo, which focuses on identifying those tasks, grouping those tasks into departments, and then figuring out the people or the roles that should perform those tasks. And from there, you can identify your processes and you have a structure literally for how you organize all other operational aspects of one of your clients' companies.
I love the big reveal.
I knew you were going to say something funny.
But it makes sense, though. It really does make sense that you're starting with the people, identifying the task, and you're correct about the org chart. I'm with a nonprofit right now, partnering with them, and We built out an org chart, and they started to understand where everything fell into place, and
Mm-hmm.
then where all the tasks and the roles. But it's amazing what a visual could do.
Yes,
It's amazing what a visual will do. It will
I
change up your
agree.
whole perspective on everything that's going on.
Yes, and again, it's such a useful and powerful way of presenting information to where everybody understands it. Because seeing that picture, and again, I'm a huge fan of being able to present things like this on one page if you can. So try to have that org chart on one page. I know that's not always possible, but if you can, even if it's at an extremely high level, just so that people can wrap their heads around, okay, well, how is our company structured? What are the departments that make up our company, and who works within each of those
So
departments?
do you recommend an org chart that's really more role-based and then separate the people, or putting the people into the roles that
I don't recommend putting the names of people at all, because you'll constantly be updating that org chart. I'm a huge fan. So remember how we had these little stick figures here for the CEO and the office manager? So on your org chart, you're going to have, let me see if I can, let me stop sharing the screen here. So let's say we're talking about an org chart. So you didn't know we were going to get to this part of the
Oh
conversation, did
no,
you?
I mean, I'm intrigued. That's why I asked. I've built 3 org charts in the
I
last
didn't,
couple weeks, so
okay, I didn't know we were going to go down this path either, but it's all good. It's great. So again, we have Department A, Department B, and Department C. And I don't know if you can see, but these are different colors. So
see,
Department A is orange, B is green, and C is blue. So imagine we have this literally on an org chart. And I'm just envisioning, again, Microsoft PowerPoint. We're working on a Microsoft PowerPoint slide. We don't need to complicate this, right? So you're going to have a box for Department A box for Department B, and a box for Department C. Let's focus on Department A again. The CEO is the top position. So you're going to have a little stick figure right above Department A, and underneath that stick figure, you're going to say CEO. That's it. You don't need to put Neil Dowdell, everybody, or Dowdell, excuse me. Everyone knows who the CEO is. If you can,
true,
if you want to,
true.
but to me, it just you'll constantly be updating, because
Updating.
you're updating this org chart.
So we have to go
Focus
back
on,
and identify somebody that's going to update the org chart every time it changes.
and here's the other thing. So whoever is over a department, you're going to put their little stick figure icon above that department. So if you have someone who is a senior vice president, a director, a manager, those people you may decide to put above the department to show that they're over that entire department, and they oversee all of the activities and everything that goes on pertaining to that particular department. And whoever reports to that person, okay, let me see if I can do this here. So here we have office manager. So remember, I made it a point to mention that I wrote the office manager title in red. Here's another reason why that's important.
Hmm.
Even though this position is vacant right now, you still want to show that role, because what's going to happen is once you see this all laid out on that org chart, anything anyone sees in red, they're going to know, okay, this is a position that needs to be filled.
Okay. Opportunity for growth.
Opportunity for growth. That, I'm so glad you said that, because when we're interviewing, or when we are recruiting to fill these positions, people want to know, how can I grow with you? This is a fast growing small business. I'm excited. Where are the opportunities for growth for me within this company? Having that org chart where you have all these little stick figures, and people can literally see a path for advancement, gets them very excited.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
That's the 3 organizational charts that I created in the last couple of weeks. Even with one of the marketing roles, we were able to identify a potential marketing coordinator role just based off the task that the marketing person was already doing.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a slew. And I was like, yep, there's a potential role that can be, segmented off. And to develop in later on in the future once the business improves. But we were identifying how to streamline, how to incorporate technology. So some of those processes that we were looking at earlier, that accounts receivable piece that
Yes.
people will do manually when they have whole systems that do it. Yep.
That's awesome, Neil. And there was something else I was going to say, and I've drawn a blank. Oh, I'm sorry. I know. So going back to the stick figures again. So we talked about any role that is currently filled, we write that in black. Anything that's vacant in red. I use blue to indicate positions that are outsourced. That might be your attorney, your CPA. It could even be your bookkeeper. It could be your insurance agent.
Your HR consultant.
Your HR consultant, Neil Dowdell. Neil, you should be
Yes.
showing up on every client that you work with. Seriously, all jokes aside, you should show up on their organizational chart.
You're right. You're right. I'm going to go back and revise them and send them an update.
It's a way to make sure that you're always around, right?
Just, so they always understand the 𝗕𝗂𝘀 strategy is always there.
Just a positive reinforcement, right?
Yes.
Now, I know we have to start wrapping up here. I knew this would go by really fast, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about business infrastructure, right? We are the Business Infrastructure Podcast. And so business infrastructure, for those of you who are listening or watching for the first time, is simply a system for how you link your people, your processes, and your tools together so that you can ensure that growth happens in a sustainable and profitable way. Also in a repeatable way, as we've been talking about today. So we've talked about this process of identifying processes. And in the midst of that, we've also kind of hinted at some of the people and the tools that could be leveraged throughout this process identification process, right? So obviously we would need a facilitator like yourself, Neil, a person who can facilitate that brainstorming exercise.
Yes.
It helps to have someone who's outside of the company because you can be more objective and you're not
afraid to ask questions.
Right. You're not afraid to ask questions. Sometimes as consultants, we're not always privy to the politics that may be going on within a company. And yes, there's always politics going on, no matter how small or how large the company is. So we have that benefit to be a neutral third party when we're working with these clients, and we can ask the tough questions and get the slings and arrows,
You need the ducks and the dives.
Right. And then obviously you want to have, this is a question, I'm sure you get asked the same thing, who should actually participate in the brainstorming exercise? And I say, if you can get as much representation from around the company as possible, the more participation you can solicit, the better. And the reason is because we're talking about change, and change is hard for a lot of people. So the sooner you can get more people involved, the sooner you get their buy-in, the sooner you gain their trust, so that as you start to implement these structural changes and you start to put some formality and standardization around the work that's actually being performed, you're less likely to get pushback.
I even ask for the naysayer, the person that is the most resistant to change, the one that that you're like, I'm not going to invite them. They're just going to cause more. I need that person. That person for
That's
me
a great point.
helps that make sure that, sometimes change can come and it needs to happen fast, but sometimes, you need someone to keep you grounded because they know where all the, they know the reason and the rationale behind why certain processes were in place, and that helps highlight some other things that you weren't aware of. But then also they just help really with the group and finding a nice little norm, because if you get a group of people that are just, yes, we're going to do this, and then you take off and start doing things, you don't know what you're going to break in the process to. So
great point. That's a great point, Neil.
Thank you.
And as far as tools, I'm sure most people who've listened to this and even you, I know when we first met, when I gave that presentation at Emory, like, really? Index cards? Really? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I was
really
impressed
it's
with
really that
index
simple.
cards.
So you can use, this is just a simple index card. You can use little smaller note cards like this. And we had stick figures. You don't even have to use stick figures. You can just use different color index cards. Different color, you may have blue index cards to indicate the roles or the positions that we were talking about. You may use a different color index card like yellow to indicate the actual name of a department. So you don't have to get those stick figures. You can just use different colored index cards. I'm sorry, you were going to say something, Neil?
I was about to say, in my world, we call those stick figures and index cards gamification at times.
Gamification, yes.
Yes.
This is the gamification,
Hmm.
um, which I have to tell you, we have software coming up, and we've been
Oh,
incorporating this gamification.
okay,
So
software. And so I'm going to beta test the software for
yes,
you.
yes, you are on the list of beta testers for that software. And we've already shamelessly plugged the book once, but I hope it's okay if I shamelessly plug it one more time. But
Please, please do.
seriously, if you want to know step by step, and I'm glad you said, Neil, that you were able to read some of the chapters in the book and literally be able to hit the ground running.
She even gives you a cheat sheet in the book. She's like, well, if you don't have time to read it, then read these chapters. And
Yes.
I was like, well, I had time to read it, but I was like, well, the two chapters she recommended that I read, or three actually, were literally, they hit the nail right on the head of what I needed. So I'm gonna go back for background on that piece. So I want, because I was really looking for, I had a problem I needed to solve yesterday about an onboarding process, and
Okay.
I realized that the answer was in, and it was in the book.
That is awesome. That makes my heart
I
sing.
was
It
like, well,
really
they could have
does.
waited. I wish they would have waited until I finished these the the podcast. But clearly, as you know, working with clients, things never go the way you want them to go. So
Right.
I was like, which you actually had more nuggets for me in this podcast too. So
Well,
thank you
good.
so
I'm
much.
glad.
Yes.
I'm glad it's working out. And I know that your business will continue to just thrive. I already know because I know your work ethic. I know how professional you are and I know how dedicated you are. When you've made a commitment to someone or a project, I know that you will see it through to completion. I know that for a fact.
To
So
completion, on to the next project. So thank you again for having
that's
me
right.
and
No,
answering my questions. That was like brilliant, really was.
thank you, Neil. I'm so glad this was helpful to you. And I'm going to be checking in on you.
Please
Okay.
do.
So because what I'm going to do is in the very last episode of this season, I give a monologue. And so I'm going to be reporting on everyone's success, their updates based on the things that we've talked about in each of the episodes.
Well, you have, based off what I've learned today and the new tools that I plan on getting from you as well, you might be expediting some of my other projects as well. So
Okay.
that I'm really excited because most people
Yay.
don't understand that human resources is really more business process improvement than it is, well, it is more so working with people too, but that business process improvement piece is dire.
And thank you for dropping so many nuggets throughout this conversation about, thinking about that people aspect, the fact that you said that, don't forget human resources is about humans and humans are throughout your organization. And
Can't get
so,
away from them.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Neil, for everyone who's listening and watching, how can they get in touch with you?
You can get in touch with me by going to my website at www.thenewsstrategy.com. Nilius is spelled N as in Nancy, E as in Edward, L as in Larry, I as in ice, U as in umbrella, S as in Sam, strategy.com. Also, I'm on LinkedIn under Cornelius Dowdell and Twitter at Nilius the THE. And then there is a Facebook page as well, the Nelia Strategy on Facebook too.
Okay. And so, for those, if you're unfamiliar with how to spell Cornelius, it's CORN like Nancy, ELIUS. You have to think about
Yes,
spelling your
that
own
is
name.
true.
Okay.
I don't. I don't spell my name that much as much people think it is. It's really complicated for me. But yes,
That is
you're correct.
hilarious.
Corn is Nancy Elius. Yes. Everybody calls me Neil, so I don't spell quick.
Yes, I know. But for those who want to connect with you on LinkedIn, that's how you find him.
Yes.
Cornelius Dowdell, and Dowdell is spelled Dowdell. And again,
That's
the
correct.
website is 𝗕𝗂𝘀𝗀𝗀strategy.com. Only when you document a current workflow will you be in the best position to understand how, why, when, and where to improve it in the future. Here's a recap of the process we discussed with Neil. First, you want to identify all of the tasks to perform throughout your entire organization. Second, group similar tasks into departments. Try not to come up with more than 9 departments at this point in the exercise. After that, you then want to look at each department individually and assign roles to each task within that department. After that, you then want to take those similar tasks within each department and identify processes. Once you have all of those processes identified, make sure you log and prioritize them into a spreadsheet. And then you can actually start to document each of those processes. Remember, only until you've actually identified and documented your processes will you be ready to apply a Lean Six Sigma methodology. Make sure you grab a copy of my book. It's called Behind the Facade: How to Structure Company Operations for Sustainable Success. In the book, especially in Chapter 8, you're going to learn exactly how to apply everything that Neil and I discussed in this episode. The book is available anywhere books are sold, including Amazon, of course. Neil, thank you so much, my friend. I really appreciate you agreeing to have this conversation live, because that's a very brave thing to do.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
and again, I will definitely be checking in and reporting on your success.
I cannot wait.
All right. Well, I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Okay. Bye. The cool thing about this framework is that it can be applied on a per department or per project basis. The bottom line is this: trying to improve a process before you've identified and documented it is like putting the proverbial cart before the horse. Neil is an incredibly motivated person, so I have no doubt that he will succeed at implementing this at his consulting practice. And knowing him, he probably already went through these exercises with his clients the day after we originally taped this episode. I'm eager to find out exactly how he's introduced these exercises to his clients. What about you? There's only one way to find out for sure, and that's by subscribing to this podcast and to our YouTube channel at businessinfrastructure.tv. When you subscribe, you'll receive a notification when the last episode of Season 10 premieres, and that's where I'll give an update on Neil's progress. In fact, you can even request your own private one-on-one consultation with me. We'll also have links to all of the resources that we mentioned during this episode in the show notes. Again, all of this information is available at businessinfrastructure.tv. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and for being a loyal subscriber. Remember, stay focused, be encouraged. This entrepreneurial journey is a marathon and not a sprint. Until the next time.